Welcome to meeting number 122 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. I'd like to remind participants of the following points. Please do wait until I recognize you by name before you speak. Also, if members are joining us virtually, if they could raise their hands if they wish to speak. Now, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on Thursday, October 3rd, 2024, the committee commences a briefing on the current situation in Lebanon. I'd like to welcome our three witnesses. We're very grateful to have here from the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, Mr. Sébastien Beaulieu, who is the Acting Assistant Deputy Minister for Emergency Management, Legal and Consular Affairs. We have Mr. Alexandre Levesque, the Assistant Deputy Minister for Europe, Middle East and Arctic Branch. And we also have Ms. Teresa Crockett, who is the Acting Executive Director for Accountability, Human Rights and United Nations Law. Now, I understand that only one of you will be making opening remarks. Mr. Levesque, you're a pro at this. You've been here many times. So you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we will open it to the members for questions. Mr. Levesque, thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Honorable members of the committee, I want to thank you for inviting us today to speak about the situation in Lebanon.
As you know, Canada and Lebanon enjoy close ties. The Lebanese community in Canada accounts for about 200,000 people, while more than 50,000 Canadians live in Lebanon.
70 years of diplomatic relations between both countries. Since 2023, Canada has celebrated Lebanese Heritage Month in November. This year, however, it will take place against the backdrop of a devastating situation in the country. The escalating conflict has already had a severe impact. Over 2,500 people have been killed and 9,000 people have been injured. Over 1.2 million people have been displaced from their homes. We
would like to express our sincere condolences to all the families and communities affected by this violence and note with sadness the deaths of Canadian citizens.
Canada has expressed its concern with the ongoing fighting between Hezbollah and Israel. Not only is it having a disproportionate impact on civilians both sides of the blue line separating Israel and Lebanon, but it poses a significant threat to security and stability in the wider region.
Along with our G7 partners, Canada is calling for ceasefire to pave the way for a diplomatic solution. We have also reaffirmed our full support for the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon and the essential role it is playing in promoting a settlement in line with UN Security Council Resolution 1701.
Canada remains committed to diplomacy as the only suitable path to stabilize the Israel-Lebanon border, fully restore the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and stability of Lebanon, and return displaced citizens to their homes with safety and security in both Lebanon and Israel. Canada firmly condemns Hezbollah's continued attacks on Israel. We cannot forget that one of the stated goals of Hezbollah, a listed terrorist entity, is the very destruction of the State of Israel. Hezbollah's attacks on Israel serve only to further destabilize the region. As such, Canada supports Israel's right to self-defense in accordance with international law. Indeed, all parties to the conflict must uphold their obligations under international law to ensure the safety and security of civilians, as well as the protection of first responders and UNIFIL personnel. Like our G7 partners, Canada was dismayed by the Israeli Defense Forces attacks affecting the UNIFIL positions along the Blue Line. L'impact humanitaire du
The
conflit
humanitarian impact of the conflict in Lebanon is enormous. In 2024, Canada pledged nearly $50 million in humanitarian aid to Lebanon. The displaced population also includes Syrian refugees, some of whom have begun to enter Syria. Canada insists that any return of refugees must be safe, dignified, and voluntary, and in accordance with international law.
Is unfolding as Lebanon is already grappling with a severe political and economic domestic crisis. Poverty in Lebanon has more than tripled over the past decade, reaching 44% of the total population. Lebanon has been without a president since October 2022. Canada has been a steady partner to address Lebanon's longer-term development challenges while urging Lebanon to elect a president, form a new government, and enact essential reforms without delay. Since 2016, Canada has allocated over $136 million in development assistance for Lebanon under the Middle East Strategy. Le Canada a également financé des programmes de paix et de sécurité.
Peace and security programs in Lebanon. In cooperation with the Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces, we are providing training, equipment, and infrastructure to the Lebanese armed forces so that they can counter transnational terrorist and criminal threats while ensuring the integrity and security of Lebanon's borders.
Finally, Canada remains concerned about the thousands of Canadians currently living in Lebanon. Since October 2023, we have been advising Canadians to avoid all travel to Lebanon, and for those there to leave while commercial options remain available. The department has also improved its contingency planning with other government departments and like-minded partners, including a non-combatant evacuation operation if required. As the security situation deteriorated in late September, Global Affairs Canada facilitated options for Canadians, permanent residents, and their eligible family members to leave Lebanon. As a result, over 1,500 departures were facilitated, including 300 internationals. The Government of Canada continues to provide information about departure opportunities on commercial flights out of Lebanon. Me fera plaisir de prendre vos questions. Merci, Monsieur
I
le
would be
Président.
happy to take any questions you may have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Levesque. We now turn to the members for questions. First up is MP Chong. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for appearing in front of our committee. You mentioned there that you facilitated 1,500 departures from Lebanon. Is that correct?
Correct.
And by departures, I mean, does that mean? Let me ask the question differently. How many flights have you facilitated leaving Lebanon? How many seats have been on those flights? What portion have been filled by Canadian citizens and Canadian permanent residents, and what portion have been fulfilled by other foreign nationals, and what percent have been empty? So that's my first question.
My colleague Sébastien Beaulieu is the expert and lead official on this, so I will turn to him.
I'm happy to report that since September 29th, over 1,500 people have departed on commercial flights, whereby we block reserved seats on MEA flights, and have also chartered aircraft for departures from Beirut to Istanbul. And that's over 1,200 Canadians, permanent residents, and immediate family who have departed on what amounts to 16 distinct flights from Beirut. This was an effort to supplement, to augment commercial capacity, and I'm pleased to report that that capacity has now been restored, and people who can book today for flights tomorrow to other capitals in the region.
Who paid for the chartered seats, and who paid for the commercial seats?
The block reservations were made by us, and then clients were invited to make their own bookings through MEA on those regularly scheduled flights. And on the charter flights, there was a cost recovery, which was the equivalent of a MEA flight to Istanbul.
Okay, so the chartered flights were on a cost recovery basis, and the commercial flights were paid for on a cost recovery basis as well?
They were paid for directly by the clients with MEA.
Understood. And so 1,200 Canadians and permanent residents have been evacuated to date. Is that correct? 1,200?
Have opted to depart on those seats that have been made available to them.
Okay, thank you for that. And you referenced this, but what is the state of commercial airline travel to Lebanon right now? Has it been fully restored, partially restored?
Over the past month, it has varied between 50 and 100 flights a day to various destinations.
Thank you. And other question I have relating to this is, what diplomatic assets do you have on the ground in Lebanon? Has that presence been maintained, scaled back, expanded? What is the state of our diplomatic presence there, diplomatic and consular presence?
I don't recall the exact number of diplomats we have serving right now in Lebanon. I want to say about 10 days ago or so, given the security situation in Beirut, we did a partial evacuation of non-essential personnel and their families, about a third of the personnel who we relocated in Cyprus, so nearby. With the understanding that as soon as the situation stabilizes, or in the case of a rush of activity and a need to count on these people, they could come back into the country.
Okay. And the method of communicating with the some 50,000 Canadian citizens that live in Lebanon that you referenced, is that primarily through the operations center here in Ottawa via email and text and electronic means, or is that primarily through our presence on the ground in Lebanon?
We have various means of communicating with Canadians abroad. The main one is what we call the Registry of Canadians Abroad, whereby we invite Canadians who are living or traveling in a particular country to register with us to get the latest information. That number is currently about 25,000 people registered on that, what we call the ROCA system. And we use that to send information to the registrants, and we've used it many times over the past month to reach out and to offer specific departure options and safety information to Canadians. Obviously, in addition to our travel advice, which is published.
Just a quick comment. Maybe you could comment later in your testimony. The government evacuated some 15,000 Canadians from Lebanon in 2006. Obviously, this is not the scale near that right now. I understand the government of Canada has worked with close allies and partners on a much bigger evacuation plan. Maybe you could tell us whether this initial evacuation of some 1,200 citizens is part of that, or if that larger plan with allies and partners is a different plan.
I think that the first distinction I'd like to introduce is the fact that the 1,200 my colleague referred to were not evacuated. This was an assisted departure. Yeah. And I'll turn to Sébastien to complete on your question, but I also wanted to say to your question about how we communicate with Canadians, it is not a single directional communication. Canadians that want to get in touch with the mission on the ground absolutely can and often do so. So it's not just us pushing out messages. We have a consular team in Beirut ready to take calls and visits from Canadians all the time.
Great. And over the past month, we've received 10,000 interactions and inquiries from Canadians on the situation in Lebanon. And to give an order of magnitude of the activity today, it was 60 calls in the past 24 hours. So things have relatively, the flow of requests for information has waned.
Thank you. Yes.
I noticed that you had said that there were 5-minute rounds, and that round was 6 minutes.
I do apologize. That was my oversight.
Would it be possible for all of us to have 6 minutes for this first round?
Sure, that's fine.
Thank
you.
We
can adjust it. So we next go to Madame Diab. Welcome to the committee. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I just want to thank members for allowing me to come in for the hour. I am of Lebanese origin. I think for those first, thank you very much for being here. to brief us parliamentarians on something that is so significant and so important to many of us, but also on the historical perspective between Canada and Lebanon. Very much appreciate your opening remarks. This year, we celebrate 70 years of diplomatic relations between Canada and Lebanon. Furthermore, Lebanese people have been in Canada since the 1880s, so it's been 140 years. So this is not something that is happening between the relations overnight. It's been a long-standing and I would say very good relationship. I want to also give a shout out here, because people have asked me to do that, to the Middle East Airlines, which is the only commercial airlines that has continued standing tall, assisting people from either leaving or coming or bringing food or anything to Lebanon in the airport. So thank you to the Middle East Airlines. I also want to give a shout out for the assisted departure that Canada has helped in. In fact, it has helped some of my constituents who made it out and did come back to Halifax. So thank you for that. I want to go to diplomacy. I want to go to, and you hinted on that, and I want to go to the United Nations Security Council resolution of 1701, and I'm sure there's many of them. Where do you see Canada? What else can Canada do to bring peace and to bring a resolution to and help Lebanon get back its independence and sovereignty? I want to give you an opportunity to tell me what else can Canada do.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I think the first thing I would answer that is the fact that Canada's role in Lebanon will always be, or anywhere in the world for that matter, will always be stronger and more effective when we can act with a large number of partners. So in the context of multilateral, and you mentioned Resolution 1701. These days 1701 has been violated by just about every party along and on either side of the blue line. So our efforts diplomatically are about engaging like-minded partners, as wide a coalition as possible, to blow some winds in the sail of these resolutions and to give them as much teeth as possible. But to be honest, this is not a situation that we're just starting to step up and realize Lebanon needs assistance with. We have been partners for a very long time. I alluded in my opening remarks to the fact that we've been a development partner of Lebanon's for a long time. We've consistently been in the top 5 donors in Lebanon. And this is for both security programming. So we've been supporting the Lebanese armed forces, providing them equipment, providing them training. We've provided a lot of development assistance by way of we'll say, economic and social programming. And in particular, this year, a lot has been done in the humanitarian field. And you will have seen, of course, the latest appeals, the latest call was just a couple of weeks ago, where we announced some funding for 2 major humanitarian Canadian organizations with a matching fund.
So Minister Joly is currently in Paris with President Macron, and I understand there's been, things that come out of that. I haven't really had a chance yet to view that, but can you tell us where you see, again, you mentioned Canada needs to act with its other partners, and obviously France is a key one. Certainly it's key for Lebanon as well, and so are other nations. Can you tell us a little bit on that, and what else can we do? I appreciate the humanitarian assistance. I appreciate the matching fund. All of those are important, but I'm looking for, what else can we do, which is what my constituents are also asking me.
Yeah. No, excellent question, Mr. Chair. And the reference to the Paris ministerial meeting that just wrapped up 2 or 3 hours ago is a good hook, because France's desire with that conference was to, first of all, put a spotlight on the situation, but in particular, rally a number of countries to do more to support the Lebanese armed forces. Fact of the matter is that the southern part of Lebanon is largely occupied by Hezbollah forces. And that is obviously the part that Israel is at war with. Israel does not want war with Lebanon. Israel is in a fight with Hezbollah and has gone further and deeper into the country to fight Hezbollah bases and centers of operation. So one of the things we as the international community really want to do is reinforce the role, the training, the capacity of the Lebanese armed forces so that they can substitute to Hezbollah forces in southern Lebanon. If that substitution were to take place, if the Lebanese armed forces could be entrusted to guarantee security in the southern part of the country, Israel would feel in much greater security. And that could lead to a political process and better diplomacy and eventually negotiations on border demarcation.
I don't know if I'm out of time.
Yep, you're out of time.
Okay, great. I wanted to go to a humanitarian question, but thank you very much.
Thank you. So next we go to Mr. Bergeron. Mr. Bergeron, you have 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to heartily thank the members from Foreign Global Affairs Canada for appearing today and for enlightening us on the situation and Canada's response. I think the objective here is not to put anyone in a tough spot, but to understand what the situation is. Earlier on, we tried to compare, my colleague Michael Chung tried to compare the numbers from 2006 when we evacuated over 15,000 people. And today, it appears we have assisted about 1,200 people. Is that true, correct? Now, my question is, what is it that in 2006 we were able to evacuate 15,000 people that we cannot do same today? The reasons are quite similar. Obviously, the security situation is quite different, and both crises are equally significantly and fundamentally different. And the responsibility of the government with regard to citizens remains, and so the same justifications are in place. Well, I think I'll reformulate my question. So what is it that in 2006 government determined that the situation was critical enough to evacuate over 15,000 people in an emergency situation, whereas given the current situation, the government doesn't seem to consider the situation critical enough to organize mass evacuations, or at least evacuations as significant of Canadian citizens from Lebanon. I understand your question better now. Mr. Chair, the question is, the response essentially is that in 2006, when these evacuations were kickstarted, there was no commercial method of travel to enable Canadians to leave the country. And like my colleague, Mr. Beaulieu, mentioned, there's about dozens of flights leaving Beirut every day as we speak. So the ports are open, the airport is open, and so the central transportation routes exist and are operational, which allows everyone to be able to leave through commercial flights, which are more economical and safe as well. Thank you. This is quite enlightening. During your appearance before our committee on the study of the sanctions from Canada, you mentioned that the goal of these sanctions is to change the behavior of the sanctioned party, but also to use economic power. But I'm afraid that Canada may be confronted with an issue of credibility and coherence, especially when we talk about respecting the rule of law and international rules and international law, as well as respecting the sovereignty of states when we actually stood in favor of Ukraine when Russia illegally attacked attacked Ukraine's sovereign territory, but Canada is not as vocal when it comes to the violation of the sovereignty of a state, member state of the UN, as is the case of Lebanon, by Israel. Is it not right for us to put in place sanctions in order to change the behavior of the faulty party and also to engage in economic sanctions? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two situations like the ones that have just been referenced have certain similarities, but also some shortcomings in these comparisons. It's important to recall that there's also the notion of legitimate defense, and that it is legitimate for a country to be able to protect itself against attacks on its territory. And I'd like to mention that from October 8th, 2023, Hezbollah, sympathizing and supporting Hamas, sent the next day hundreds of missiles and missiles towards Israel. And since then, Israel has had to suffer multiple attacks, and these two situations are not analogous in the sense that the fact that Israel felt it necessary to attack certain terrorist positions in the southern part of Lebanon, where they do not have control of the territory in order to counter the efforts of Hezbollah, who are a constant threat and who are compromising the return of over 80,000 Israeli inhabitants living close to the border with Lebanon. And this is part of the legitimate defense efforts. Now, what the government has reported on several occasions is that all of this needs to be done within certain parameters, and while always taking care to spare as much as is possible civilian lives. And this is part of the messaging that you've probably heard repeated from this government, and following several communiques in that respect on a national and multilateral, multinational level. I think, yes, those comments are quite timely. And having said this, currently we see that Israel is not only launching attacks on the southern border, on southern Lebanon, but also going as far up as northern Lebanon.
So if you could ask a very quick question, and we'll receive a quick response.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Ne croyez-vous pas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So don't you think that there's a danger that Israel wants to create a buffer zone on the sovereign territory of Lebanon by violating, once again, the rules of international law? That risk is present, and this is quite a fluid situation that evolves on a daily basis, and will guarantee you that this is something we are looking at very closely before making any pronouncements.
Thank you. We now go to MP McPherson. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to start by saying that my sympathies are with you, Mr. El-Khoury, all of those Canadian Lebanese and Lebanese people who are suffering right now. I know how worried the community is. I know how worried you are for your loved ones and for the country of Lebanon. So I wanted to express that. I also want to make it very clear that what Hezbollah and Hamas is doing is obviously terrorist. They are obvious terrorist organizations, and they are obviously being armed by what I would say is another terrorist entity, which is the Iranian regime. That said, you know, I have some questions about the behavior of Israel, and I'm going to start by saying, you know, the Financial Times has reported that Israel has used the incendiary chemical white phosphorus in attacks on a UN base, which has injured 15 peacekeepers. Can you confirm these reports?
We have read the same reports, open source reports.
Have you asked governments whose peacekeepers were injured and whether they can confirm whether these attacks on their peacekeepers involved banned weapons?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Have you asked governments whose peacekeepers were injured whether they can confirm that these attacks were on their peacekeepers and that they involved banned weapons?
To my knowledge, that question has not been put to those governments, but it would typically be done through the UN directly, given that they report to UN Command.
Does Canada consider the use of white phosphorus on UN peacekeepers to contravene the Chemical Weapons Convention?
That is a very complicated question. I'm afraid I cannot answer in full detail. White phosphorus is a weapon that can be legitimate in some circumstances.
I have so many questions, so what I'll do is I'll ask you if you wouldn't mind to provide a written response if it is too complicated to provide it in a short response.
Complicated and preliminary, given that the attack happened very, very recently. Obviously, facts need to be gathered before we can pronounce ourselves on this.
Breaching and entering a UN position is a further flagrant violation of international law and Security Resolution 1701. Any deliberate attack on peacekeepers is a grave violation of international humanitarian law and Resolution 1701. Has Canada formally notified Israel that it objects to these violations of international law?
We frequently have discussions with Israel about expressing and demonstrating restraint.
Have you, in this particular example, have you provided any formal notification to Israel on this particular example?
Not the way you described it, no.
As you know, forced displacement is illegal under international humanitarian law. We've seen repeatedly how Israel warns civilians in Lebanon to leave their homes and then bombs their communities indiscriminately. These are people who have no affiliation to Hezbollah, whose homes are completely destroyed. Does the government of Canada consider this to be forced displacement or another violation of international law?
Again, there's a legal threshold that has to be met for the government to be able to pronounce itself on such a question. I cannot give that legal assessment right now, but at a high level, yes, the government has been critical of the excess of force that has been used in a number of occurrences.
I think the committee would be very interested in hearing from you, and you do have the ability to provide a more fulsome response to that. And if you could answer, has Canada assessed Israel's attacks in Lebanon to be potential violations of Lebanese sovereignty?
I would provide the same answer. No, that assessment has not been done today.
And when that assessment is done again, we would welcome that at this committee.
Naturally.
Has Canada assessed any of these attacks to be indiscriminate?
No, not to date.
International law, including the 1954 Hague Convention and the 1972 World Heritage Convention, clearly outlines the protection of cultural heritage during armed conflict. This week, we saw Israel bomb the ancient city of Tyre, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. We also saw this in Gaza, where 60% of the heritage sites assessed by UNESCO have been damaged in the past year. Lebanese people are saying this is not just a war on civilians, but also on their history, cultural heritage, and very existence. Why hasn't Canada commented on the destruction of cultural property in Lebanon to date?
I would give the same answer to the previous question in this line of questioning. These are you're quoting international text laws that require deeper analysis. So, anticipating your next question, yes, we will be happy to provide this to the committee once the assessment is complete.
A report from the United Nations has said that Gaza's economy would take 350 years to return to its pre-conflict levels. With the escalation of destruction in Lebanon and considering UNDP has warned of catastrophic socioeconomic collapse due to this war, what would you estimate the cost of rebuilding Lebanon to be, and how long would you estimate this would take? And how much should donor countries like Canada be expected to contribute to the rebuilding of Gaza, particularly as we have noted, France has recently allocated $108 million to Lebanon?
No such monetary assessment has been completed to date for Lebanon, and of course, everything else is just an estimate. But these are astronomical sums, which is why the best thing the international community can do right now is to do everything in its power to put an end to the fighting, so that reconstruction can begin.
We have been very clear as a country, and I'm very proud of that we are here to help Ukraine rebuild after the conflict in Ukraine. Why are we not as vocal in helping Gaza and Lebanon rebuild in that circumstance?
I think pronouncements along those lines have been made as well. The situation is not as clear-cut, and it will require a regional bargain, if you will. And I think a number of countries, particularly in the Middle East and in the Gulf, will be prepared to come and weigh in and lean in, but only when there is a guarantee, or a reasonable guarantee, that hostilities can cease and will not start up again. And that requires a political and diplomatic solution.
Thank you for answering the questions.
Thank you. We now turn to the second round. And for this round, We are providing 3 minutes for the second round, and we start off with Mr. Abou-Taif. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the witnesses. We can do on the ground today, rather than some real stuff. $1 billion US was committed in Paris today. How much Canada have committed as part of the $1 billion?
I can't say whether anything was announced today because, again, the meeting just wrapped up a couple of hours ago. What I can say is that the humanitarian assistance commitment by Canada to date in 2024 is just short of $50 million. But like I said, this adds to the security programming, the development assistance that is ongoing as part of Canada's Middle East strategy.
Two figures of displaced people, 1.2, 1.4 million. Can you confirm a number?
These are always estimates, and the figure we have is 1.2 million.
Out of those, how many Syrian refugees have left back to Syria?
I don't have the exact number, but we do know that a number of Syrian refugees, as I said in my opening remarks, started crossing back over to Syria.
Lebanese being internally displaced in schools and local communities, do we know how many went to Iraq?
No, I don't have that figure.
No idea. The situation is... The previous commitment of Canadian aid to Lebanon was going toward helping the Syrian refugees in Lebanon. Now, since some have left to Syria, is this going to affect the amount of help and money that Canada commit to help Lebanon?
I mean, the history of our development assistance and humanitarian assistance in the Middle East in the past, I'd say definitely in the past 5 years, has been guided by the Middle East strategy, which was the government's approach to funding and supporting in response to the ISIS and Daesh crisis of 10 years ago. This was the framework. As you know, the Middle East strategy is about to sunset, so we are currently developing plans and proposals for what it will be replaced by. So it is premature at this point to say what it will be replaced by.
To strengthen the UNIFIL, there's a proposal to have multiple nationality United Nations forces to basically help the Lebanese army to cope with bringing security to the southern Lebanon and to the borders. Will Canada be able to participate, or is this an option for Canada to participate in those forces?
So this is a question, if we're talking about deployment of forces, that would need to be asked of the Department of National Defense. Having said this, so far, Canada has found that the best contribution was to be a financial and monetary contributor to UNIFIL, while other countries have provided troops. I cannot presume or preempt what might come up next.
Thank you.
Thank you. We next go to Mr. El-Khoury. Mr. El-Khoury, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to our witness. Monsieur Levesque, vous savez, la
Mr.
population
Levesque, you know that the population south of Lebanon since 1988 to 2000 was not the same population. They've suffered really terrible conditions. So what would be Canada's role? Is Canada supporting that the presence of UN forces should be located on both sides of the border? Because this would provide double security for this population and also help eliminate the presence of forces that are not subjected to our government. Thank you for your question. In order to have such an operation on a sovereign territory, you need obviously to be invited by the country in control of that territory in order to have a multinational task force. To my knowledge, such a proposal has never been formally tabled within the UN circle. However, we have a multinational task force under UNIFIL which enjoys significant support, and this support was reinforced even at the Security Council. And that's where our efforts focus right now, especially given that the weak security apparatus in South Lebanon is due to the fact that these armed forces controlling the territory are actually Hezbollah forces, and the international community would like to reinforce the UNIFIL forces, and Canada strongly stands behind this effort, and this was done in the UN, on the UN stage, in a public and international manner. You know that part of the Lebanese population would not like to have another force than the one present right now, but the fact that if Canada can play a role as the UNIFIL that is present on both sides of the border, I think this provides maybe more safety, and I think that on an international scale, this can provide this can create the conditions for long-lasting peace. We cannot every 10, 15 years afford to have such a war rekindled. So what can Canada do in order to arrive at a solution which allows negotiation between both parties, the Lebanese and the Israelis? Thank you very much. I take note of the suggestion you are proposing. But what I'd say is that we all have an objective within the region, a common objective, which is that of eliminating the threat to regional safety, which is Hezbollah. So I understand the comparison and the equivalence established with both sides of the border, but we see, first and foremost, safety within the region being compromised by a terrorist group that is armed, as we all know, by Iran, and this group is causing the majority, if not all, of the unsafety in the region.
My apologies, Mr. El-Khoury. So we now go to Mr. Bergeron. Mr. Bergeron, you have a minute and a half.
Une minute et demie. Je vais essayer de faire mon mieux.
A minute and a half. I'll do my best. Mr. Lévesque, do you consider that attacks against UNIFIL are a violation of international law?
I think these attacks are unacceptable and go beyond acceptable standards. And once more, like I mentioned, to previous questions, making pronouncements on questions of international law, questions that require in-depth analysis, and we cannot make these pronouncements lightly, especially because this is based on international law, and these are actions that go beyond acceptable norms and standards. Hence the reason why the government came out very strongly on this issue. So don't these actions require that we take a firm stance with Israel, and stance that could go even up to imposing sanctions? Well, all the tools in our toolbox are always weighed and very carefully, and all the options need to be analyzed. But of course, we need to make sure that our analysis is complete before we declare the situation as a violation of international law. And how far are you gone with the analysis at the Department's legal services? Well, we're talking about events that occurred only a few days ago, so this is something that is currently under observation and analysis, and this is never the kind of situation that you can analyze lightly. And counting this in terms of days, it has to take more time in order for the analysis to be serious. I imagine you're going to keep us abreast of the developments.
We next go to Madam McPherson. You have a minute and a half.
Minute and a half.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you again to the officials for being here today. I'd like to follow up on the question that Mr. Bergeron just asked. Is the government of Canada considering sanctioning Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, and Smotrich for the crimes and the genocidal language that they've been using?
Again, I can only say that all tools that are available to the government are always under consideration. What the question suggests are things that we're considering as part of advice we would provide to the government, and so I can't pronounce on whether this is active consideration, about to happen or not. But yes, nothing is ever off the table, and we always consider how to best answer to any situation.
Well, I would say that obviously we've listed Hamas and Hezbollah as terrorist organizations, as they should be. I think that there's also been sanctions that have been applied to Hamas, which seems unnecessary considering that they are a listed terrorist entity. But perhaps that's more of a PR position that the minister has taken there. But that was able to be done quite quickly. We do know that other countries have been able to take some of these steps, countries that are democracies, countries that are, in fact, Canada's allies. Why is it taking so long to make some of these assessments and determine that some of those listed should be sanctioned?
Perhaps just a point of clarification, since you mentioned the fact that members of Hamas have been sanctioned in addition to Hamas as an organization. Yes, Hamas as an organization is sentenced. It doesn't mean that every person who's a member of Hamas has a membership card that they go around carrying. So
if they are a member of Hamas, they are not sanctioned because they are a listed terrorist entity?
Of course they are. What I'm saying is that sometimes to double down and make sure that the system can catch.
So we're extra sanctioning them.
Well, if you want to be able to trigger our immigration systems, for example, it's easier to do it with a name and a date of birth than it is with an affiliation that may or not appear on somebody's passport.
That's all I have.
I'm afraid. So next we go to Mr. Chong, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to go back to the last question I asked. So there have been about 1,200 voluntary departures, as you term them, of Canadian citizens and permanent residents from Lebanon. It's a voluntary coordination process right now, but in the event that there is the situation deteriorates and we're into a 2006 type emergency, I'd like you to tell the committee a bit more about what I understand to be a much broader plan coordinated amongst Canada's closest allies to evacuate citizens from Lebanon.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. My colleague alluded to what we refer to as NEO, Non-Combatant Evacuation Operation, as one of the elements that we are looking at, and that is part of our plan, our prudent planning. We have been exercising and doing that planning for the past decades, since 2006. So many things have gone into the planning, but what's important at this stage is that there are commercial options that are available, and we urge Canadians to depart.
On this plan that you're talking about, what other countries are involved with the planning?
There's at least 20 countries that have their own plans that come together in an annual exercise in Cyprus each year to test, to validate plans, and Canada is part of that group.
And what is the trigger for the plan?
Each country has its own triggers, but in comparison, and there was a question earlier today on comparing the situation with 2006, one important distinction from 2006 is that then the airport was not operable. And today what we see are regular flights, more than 50 flights.
But I assume that this plan, this emergency plan that you're referring to, has contingencies for an event where the airport is not available.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
43 seconds remaining, but thank you for that. We now go to Mr. Zuberi. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. And I know that you are representatives from Global Affairs. I'm also aware that you work with other departments. And the question I want to ask and start off with is around evacuations, but relates to who is being evacuated. Canadians, PRs, and their families. Canadians, permanent residents, and their families. With respect to, are you finding that there are some who are staying back within Lebanon in order to care for their loved ones, and they have to make a choice between caring for their loved ones in Lebanon or coming immediately back to Canada? Are you hearing anything around that?
The decision to leave Lebanon is a very difficult one for many, and there are various reasons why people have decided to remain in Lebanon. Our commitment and our top priority is to help Canadians return to Canada. That includes permanent residents, and it also extends to their immediate family under the IRPA definition, and that's the standard approach that we have been using consistently over the years in various crises. Thank you.
And immediate family is defined as spouse, dependent children 21 and below. Is that correct?
Correct.
So are you finding scenarios in which individuals, Canadians, and others who are qualified to take the assisted departure flights, are you finding scenarios in which people are choosing to not take those flights because of family members outside of spouses and dependent children under 21?
There's a range of decisions, but anecdotally, some people do tell us about extended family, friends.
It's a yes,
they
right?
do not want to leave.
Like a parent, for example, a sibling. Is that happening?
It's one of many reasons.
One of many reasons. So what I'm getting at here is, are there thoughts and considerations, and I understand you're not immigration, but when you're in dialogue with immigration, is there any plan right now to extend those who are coming, maybe on a temporary visa, to Canada during this conflict, so that Canadians can come back here with their loved ones, their parents, for example, their a 25-year-old child? Are these people? Is there consideration to this?
And from Global Affairs on any special immigration measures.
Do you think that would help Canadians get out if we did do that?
That would at best be answered by representatives from IRCC.
I understand that, given that your Global Affairs and immigration is elsewhere. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Zuberi. That concludes the questions from the members. However, I did want to ask one last question, if I may. You have shared with us all of the humanitarian assistance Canada is providing. You also touched on security assistance that we're providing. But I wanted to follow up on the question that was asked by Madame Diab. Given the scale of the devastation and the concern that is quite palpable around this table and indeed across the country, is there anything more we can do diplomatically? Is there any convening powers you think we might have, or anything we can do to see a de-escalation and make sure that the world is there for Lebanon?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. What I can say is we're not leaving anything on the table. We are deploying whatever efforts Canada is able to deploy, both the assistance you referred to, but also our convening power and the alliances we've created. We are an increasingly present and loud voice around tables like the G7, at the UN, and many other subgroupings. So really, it's about creating momentum.
So is anything being contemplated, or are we focused on considering how we can be of more assistance on the diplomatic front?
Nothing that doesn't already exist as part of the tools that we're using is what I would say.
Okay. Well, thank you very, very much, Monsieur Beaulieu, Mr. Levesque, Madame Crockett.
After the witnesses have left. It's not just...
No, well, we have to go in camera after.
Before we go into camera, I would request a suspension. If we suspend for a few minutes.
Yes, we are suspending in any event because we're going in camera. Absolutely. Well, thank you very, very much for your testimony. That was very helpful. Committee stands suspended for 5 minutes.
you.